Hi, everyone, and welcome to Karma Insights. Today, Shawn and I are going to talk about leadership and loneliness. And let's just jump in right away here. Shawn, what is leadership and why is it lonely being a leader?
Yeah. First, maybe I just say, I tell people, do you feel lonely? And if they say yes, I say, that might be okay. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I say that. I think a leader's job is to set the future, set the vision for the future, and to be out in front of the group. Right? So if you're leading a team, you're not going to necessarily be only thinking about what's the team doing now, but how is the future better? And that's your job, is to set that future. And when you say that we have to have a different future, that implies that things have to change for the better, ideally. So what usually happens is people resist that, right?
Mm.
People don't see the future that you're describing. They don't yet understand it. And so there's a lot of doubt, there's resistance. And this is what I think starts to create loneliness, is that the leader doesn't feel like the team comes with him immediately. And that leads to loneliness. So that's, I think, one of the things that I've experienced in my career is feeling lonely.
Could you give us some examples, Shawn, of how this has shown up from whether it's in a crisis or some other example of you helping to lead a team or your organization through some major change or where you particularly felt lonely? And let's start there, but then I'd love to then from there also jump into a little bit of how you've seen this arise for you personally as well. So let's start on the organization, then maybe we can move it to the individual level from there.
Yeah. Let me give you like two examples. One for me personally as a leader. The second one maybe as an industry kind of example. Actually, let's do the industry one first. It's probably the one that most people would appreciate. I remember hearing when the iPhone came out, Steve Jobs was basically doing something bold that nobody thought would be successful. It was an integration of all the different pieces, a phone, a iPod, I think at the time, iPod, and what was the other thing? An internet device. And
Sure.
no keyboard, right? Nothing. And at that time, I think the BlackBerry was popular. It had a big tactile keyboard, and everyone thought he was going to fail. And I think even Steve Ballmer, the CEO at the time of Microsoft, said nobody is going to buy such an expensive thing. And by the way, it doesn't have a keyboard. What a stupid idea. And I'm sure he felt lonely at first, right? Nobody thought that was a great thing. And then look at what happened. He changed the world. And I don't want to be without my iPhone. And that's how many years now, right?
Yeah.
So there's an example of a real leader saying that the future has to be different, can be different, and put people having a whole bunch of doubt. And I'm sure his own team probably was nervous and worried as well on building that future with him. But he said, no, this is where we're going. And for me, I think I've experienced that many times in my career. And one of the most obvious times is always in a crisis. You and I had another discussion about crisis. And when there's a crisis, people, they don't know what to do. And then you're telling them, look, we have to go this way. This is the way it has to be done. And there's going to be a lot of doubt unless there's a tremendous amount of trust. And the first real crisis I went through as a leader, that happened to me. It's like it was too chaotic and it really wasn't what needed to happen. And it was a very lonely time, very
Mm.
lonely time. I just learned over the time, though, that it's part of the job. And that's what helped me keep my mind on this whole thing is if you're a leader, you're going to be lonely at times. It's part of the job. And that's like, you got to just know that it's normal. And somehow that to
Yeah.
me settles me out to know that Yep. Okay. Here's that loneliness feeling again.
Mm.
It doesn't bother me. It's just like it doesn't bother me as much. Yes, it still bothers me to feel lonely, but it's okay. Yeah, that's my job, and that's what we have to do because we're trying to make a better future. And yeah, that happens to me even in my daily work with my current job. So it never goes away.
Yeah. It's almost, it's as if you have to build the muscle for it to be okay and know that's probably where you should be.
Yeah.
Might not be what you want to feel, but it's where you need to be a bit.
Yeah. The first time you go through it is like the most difficult time because the first time you go through it, you're like, what's happening?
Yeah.
And as you said, you build the muscle means, hey, wait a minute, this happened again and this happened again. And it's like all of a sudden there's a pattern here. Yeah, every time I'm saying we should do something about a better future, this is the way I start to feel. And then you start to step back and realize, hey, this is really just a normal thing.
Yeah.
But at the first time, you don't think it's normal.
Yeah.
It's like you want to be popular as a leader, you want to be loved. But guess what?
Hmm.
A leader has to do unpopular things to make a better future.
Yeah.
And that's the part that creates that loneliness is you get that from the pack, you're separate. But it's temporary. I can tell you it's not forever. If you're successful at bringing people to the future, then they all come and join you eventually.
Yeah. Shawn, could you share a little bit about that, of this idea of stepping back to really look at things, and that practice of it, of how to create the self-awareness that you're, what are the signs or the red flags, so to speak, that tells you, hey, I need to step back a little bit? And what are some of the practices to make sure that as a leader, whether at work or at home, that you're not stepping back, that you're getting complacent, basically?
Yeah, I think that's what I was even going to say is one of the traps is to become complacent, right? So if you feel like everything is running great and you're only celebrating all your great success, you need to celebrate, but you also need to have a bit of paranoia,
Mm,
healthy paranoia, is because your competition is coming after you.
yeah.
So you can celebrate your successes, but then you need to be able to step back and say, okay, what can I do to improve things next? Right? Because it's a continuous improvement kind of thing. So that's where the paranoia is required, is like you got to be looking out. I think there was a book from the Intel CEO, I think it was Andy Grove. He said that only the paranoid survive, or something like that. So it's not about like freaking yourself out. It's just about having healthy paranoia to look around. So you got
Mm,
to push yourself out of the comfort zone,
yeah.
right? If you feel too comfortable, then it's probably a sign of complacency, and get into your uncomfortable zone. Then what does it take is you got to have that mindset, but then you need to have also some technique and skills. So you got to be able to take yourself from the ground level of where everything's happening up to the balcony. You got to put yourself as the leader in the balcony, trying to see the overall view of what's happening and what's out in front.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, leaders don't take themselves up to that balcony often enough because they're on the ground floor, which is important, but that's more the management side of things. The leadership side of things is looking out in front,
Mm,
looking for the patterns, looking for where is the synergy examples where things are not as a system coming together, and then having the vision skills to define the future. And it's really, vision is a skill. You have to be able to imagine the future and then describe it to people in a way that's concrete enough that they buy in.
Shawn, this idea is coming up for me here that I want to share, and I would be curious to get your thoughts on it. Is that there's, as you're saying, there's the management aspect, and then there's the leadership aspect. But then I was also thinking about it from an almost whatever your area of expertise is, there can be some dominant thinking that is taking place. I'll give a very basic example of in tech, everyone is saying X is the way to go. And that way you are doing the best thing for your organization. And you're almost amongst your peers of leaders. You have your organization, then you have your peers who are also leaders. And that's another layer there, and trying to step out of that as well. Because you're sharing this idea of wanting, everyone wants to feel liked, right? And
Yeah.
the easiest way to feel liked is to probably have the same opinion, right? And I'll pause there, but curious to get your thoughts on what I just shared.
I think there's a term for that that's called groupthink. So it's like that's part of comfort, right? Everyone agrees. And we're even guilty of this in some of the things that we work on is like we like the harmony, we like the bringing people together, collaborative, and everyone has a say. But as soon as it's groupthink, then I think you start to lose the differentiation or the cutting edge angle. And I
Yeah,
think this is the job of the leader is that you gotta also find the different, unique voice that's got merit that can make you even stronger and better and listen to
sure.
that. But it's going to be the minority, right? That person is probably out there, but is lonely also, not being heard. So as a leader,
Hmm.
you have to be able to spot that. That's where that vision stuff comes in too, right? So if you know what's the future you want to build, then you're going to be able to detect that today's way is good enough for today, and that's what everyone's agreeing on. But what is it that you need for the future? It's not what's available today. And then
Yeah,
how do you build that? There's innovation that's out there that's happening in your organization. You have to be able to spot that innovation and then pull it in and amplify it. That's your job. And you'll end up having to fight the system that doesn't like that innovation because it's different, because the whole system is wired to do what you're doing today. And so if you want to change the future, there's only 1% of the people who want that. 99% of the people are hired to do what's the job today.
yeah,
So again, loneliness. You got to be able to know that's normal, and you got to be able to support the people who have the vision for the future and make sure that you really put it into the strategy of your team, the strategy of your company.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Would you, okay, so let's jump into this for a second. I would love to talk for just a couple minutes here of, and this has been a theme of some of our conversations in the past as well, Sean, is of family, kids, and how that applies to a lot of this. And I think, frankly, even as adults, forget about just kids, right? In our personal situations, etc. Because I think that those examples not only important personally, but also can help us reflect to remember them organizationally as a leader in an organization. So I'll say this. How would you apply this in your family? How would you apply this with your kids?
Yeah. I'm glad you asked, because this is one of the things I really like to talk about is that there's such a there's such a not comparison. What's the word I'm looking for? Sorry. There's things that apply at work that also can apply as parents. I didn't say that great, but you can be a parent. Being a parent is being a leader. That's what I'm trying to say. Sorry for taking so long to get there. I think that as a parent, you have to think of yourself as a leader for your family, as a leader for your kids, and you have to be able to also show the role model behaviors to do the right thing, right? You will do things probably, if you do what you think is the right thing, differently than other parents, right? Differently than the probably the what on Instagram, right?
Mm,
So it's the right things are oftentimes the hard things. the things that
Yeah.
take more work, or the things that are not as popular. And that's the loneliness part that matches to what we're saying here is if you want to be a great leader for your family, you probably need to do things that is not popular, that is not mainstream. But mainstream and popularism is not necessarily going in the right direction. So I think you got to be the role model for that. And then I think you have to also realize that leadership is not only about leading a group, it's also about leading yourself. So giving this to your kids also to think about, they have to have the strength to lead themselves, to do the unpopular thing, to do the hard thing. That also is something to instill in your kids, and frankly, for even back to work topics, in the team members of your work, that they need to represent these principles and things that are the hard things sometimes that people won't want to get on board with, but it's the right thing. So I think all of this applies into parenting, all of this applies into leading yourself, and that can oftentimes feel lonely, which is why people give up on it. But you got to
Yeah.
persevere through it. Yeah, because
Mm.
it's the right thing is the hard road. The right thing is to do the unpopular thing. And that's society is oftentimes not saying that,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel.
Yeah. There's so much there that I'm sure we could even unpack further there. And there's so many instances with my kids, my family, with myself that I can think about in that way. I would rather, frankly, sleep in. But that's not the right, you know what I mean? But it
Amen.
never
Yeah.
feels right after I do that.
Well,
And
I'm
so,
not perfect at this stuff myself either,
yeah,
right? So I'm not here to
yeah,
tell people that I'm living to some perfect thing. I just try to keep reminding myself of what's the right thing and
yeah,
get myself back in line when I fall out of line. But yeah, it happens to all of us.
100%. Shawn, it was wonderful speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your time. I hope that people know that feeling lonely is just part of the job of being a parent and a leader, not to be afraid of it. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.